They used to call it the golden age of flying. People dressed up to get on an airplane. 4 stripes on your sleeve meant something. It meant you were a god of the sky, untouchable, in complete control of 30 tons of aluminum, hurtling through the stratosphere. My name is Captain James Sterling. For 38 years, I flew everything from propeller cargo planes to the queens of the skies, the Boeing 747s. I've logged over 25,000 hours in the air. That's almost 3 full years of my life spent above the clouds. When passengers see a pilot walking through the terminal, they see the pressed uniform, the shiny wings, the calm smile. They don't see the fear. We are trained to hide it. We are trained to be the calmest person in the room when the alarms are screaming. I retired 15 years ago. I live a quiet life now near the coast. I watch the gulls fly and I keep my feet firmly on the ground. But there are nights when the wind howls around the eaves of my house, sounding just like the slipstream over a cockpit windshield at Mach 0.8. On those nights, I don't sleep. Pilots talk about the near misses, the times luck was on your side. But there is one flight I rarely speak about. It wasn't a near miss. It was something else. It was a void, a terrifying silence over the blackest part of the ocean. It was the night Flight 707 ceased to exist for 4 hours. And 30 years later, I'm still not sure how we made it back to the world of the living. Let's go back to October 1976. I was flying a Boeing 707 for a major transatlantic carrier. The 707 was a beautiful aircraft, noisy, smoky engines, lots of analog dials. You really had to fly her. She didn't fly herself like the modern jets. We departed London Heathrow at 2200 hours, heading for New York's JFK. It was a red-eye flight, full load of fuel, 180 souls on board, sleeping in the cabin behind me. The first 3 hours were textbook routine. We climbed to 35,000 feet. The drone of those 4 Pratt & Whitney engines was a hypnotic lullaby. The cockpit was dark, lit only by the soft red glow of hundreds of instrument dials and gauges. My first officer, a sharp young kid named Danny, was monitoring the fuel flow. Our flight engineer, old grumpy Bill, was managing the systems panel behind us. We were over the mid-Atlantic, the point of no return. Too far to turn back to Europe, too far to reach America if something major went wrong. Below us was just thousands of miles of freezing, pitch-black ocean. At 1:45 a.m. Zulu time, I was sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the stars rotate slowly above the glare shield. Then it happened. Not with a bang, but with a flicker. The main instrument panel shuddered, the red lights dimmed, flared bright for a second, and then darkness. Almost instantly, the autopilot disengaged with a loud clunk. The yoke jerked in my hands. "Captain, I'm losing bus A and B," Bill yelled from behind me. Before I could respond, the radios went dead. The static hiss in my headset vanished into total silence. The radar screen faded to black. The transponder, the device that tells air traffic control where you are, died. In a span of 10 seconds, a catastrophic electrical cascade failure had wiped out our navigation, our communication, and our ability to see where we were going. We were a ghost plane, invisible to the world, hurtling through the dark at 500 miles an hour. "My controls," I said automatically, gripping the yoke to stabilize the plane. The silence in that cockpit was heavier than anything I have ever experienced. No radio chatter from Gander or Shanwick Oceanic Control, just the rushing wind and the terrifying realization of our isolation. We tried the emergency backup protocols. Nothing worked. We were flying on basic battery power, just enough to keep the engines turning and the essential flight controls working. But we had no idea where we were exactly. We were drifting in the void. Panic is a virus in a cockpit. I could smell it on Danny, the young first officer. His breathing was shallow, fast. "Captain, what do we do? They don't know where we are," Danny whispered. I had to be the rock. "We fly the plane, Danny. That's what we do. We keep her level. We keep her heading west." I looked back at Bill, the flight engineer. He was holding a flashlight in his teeth, frantically checking fuses, trying to bypass the fried circuits. He just shook his head. "It's fried, Jim. The main buses are melted. We're on our own." We had fuel for about 4 more hours of flight. But if the winds aloft had changed, if we were drifting off course by even a few degrees, we would miss North America entirely and run out of fuel over the open ocean. That's when I realized I had to do something I hadn't done since flight school 20 years prior. "Bill," I said, "get me the sextant." Before GPS, before inertial navigation systems, pilots used the stars to navigate over the ocean, just like ancient mariners. The 707 still had a small sextant port in the roof of the cockpit. For the next 3 hours, that was my world. I stood on my seat, head stuck into the cockpit ceiling, peering through a small optical scope at Arcturus, Polaris, and Betelgeuse. I measured their angles above the horizon, scribbling calculations on a notepad with a shaky hand by flashlight. It was archaic. It was terrifying. One wrong calculation, one misidentified star, and 180 people would die. Behind the armored cockpit door, the passengers were sleeping, completely unaware that their lives were hanging by the thread of a handwritten math equation in the dark. The longest night of my life began to end. The eastern horizon behind us turned a bruised purple, then a watery gray. Dawn is usually beautiful at 35,000 feet. That morning, it just meant we could see the ocean we were about to crash into. According to my star calculations, we should be approaching the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. But looking down, all I saw was endless, terrifying gray water. And then, the number 1 engine sputtered. "Fuel's getting critical on number 1, Captain," Bill said quietly. His voice was flat, resigned. "We had maybe 30 minutes of fuel left across all 4 engines. If I had miscalculated the winds, we were dead." The cockpit was dead silent. Danny was staring at the fuel gauges as if willpower could make them rise. I scanned the horizon ahead, my eyes burning from fatigue. Gray sky met gray water, and then a shape. Just a smudge on the horizon, slightly darker than the clouds. A jagged line. Land. I felt a relief so profound my knees almost buckled. "There," I pointed. "Terra firma." But we weren't safe yet. We were still radio silent, an unidentified object approaching sovereign airspace during the Cold War. And we were running on fumes. As we descended through the clouds, the coastline of Newfoundland became clear.
I spotted a small airfield near the coast. It wasn't a major airport. The runway looked short, too short for a heavy 707. "We have one shot at this," I told the crew. "We're coming in hot, and we're heavy. Danny, drop the gear now. Bill, dump any remaining fuel from the reserve tanks. We need to be as light as possible." The approach was frantic. Without instrument landing systems, I had to fly this massive jet visually, like a giant Cessna. The runway rushed up at us. We hit the tarmac hard. Tires smoked, brakes screamed. I used every inch of asphalt, reversing the engines with everything they had left. We shuddered to a stop, maybe 50 feet from the end of the runway, right at the edge of a cliff dropping into the sea. Silence returned to the cockpit. Not the terrifying silence of the electrical failure, but the silence of survival. The engines spooled down and died, starved of fuel right at the moment we stopped. We had made it. We opened the cockpit door. The head stewardess looked at us confused. "Captain, the passengers are asking why we landed in Canada. Is there a delay?" They had no idea. They had slept through the entire ordeal. There were investigations, of course. The electrical fault was traced to a faulty junction box that should have been replaced years ago. But it was kept quiet. The airline didn't want people to know how close 180 people came to vanishing without a trace. I flew for another 10 years after that night, but something inside me had changed. When you stare into that kind of void for 4 hours, relying only on stars and ancient math to keep you alive, you realize how fragile it all is. People ask me if I miss flying. I miss the view. I miss the camaraderie. But I don't miss the wait. Sometimes I stand on the beach near my house, looking out over the Atlantic at night. I look up at the stars, Polaris, Betelgeuse, and I give them a little nod of thanks. They guided me home when the technology man built failed us. Trust your instruments, they teach you, but always, always trust yourself first. Good night, everyone. Safe travels.